The doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and I swear my heart stopped beating for 3 full seconds. I was standing in my kitchen in Cleveland, stirring a pot of soup that was really just an excuse to keep my hands busy, when that sound cut through the silence of my house like a knife. For 10 years, 10 entire years, I'd spent Christmas Eve alone in this house, and nobody ever rang my doorbell. The mail carrier didn't come on Christmas Eve. My neighbors knew better than to disturb me on this particular night. Jehovah's Witnesses took the holiday off. My hand froze on the wooden spoon. The soup kept bubbling, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The doorbell rang again. I set down the spoon with shaking fingers and walked toward my front door like a woman approaching the edge of a cliff. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror, a 74-year-old woman with short gray hair that I'd actually styled that morning for no one but myself, wearing the same red cardigan I wore every Christmas, the one with the little reindeer buttons that Thomas had bought me 20 years ago, back when our house was full of noise and laughter and our son's terrible attempts at playing Jingle Bells on his keyboard. I reached for the doorknob, and my whole hand was trembling. When I opened that door and saw David standing on my porch, older, tired, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a decade ago, holding a worn suitcase in one hand and a small wrapped gift in the other, I understood that this was the moment my life would split into before and after. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on that one syllable. "I'm home. If you still want me." But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that moment shattered me into a million pieces and then immediately put me back together, you need to know how we got there. You need to understand the 10 years of silence, the words that couldn't be taken back, the pride that built a wall between a mother and her only child. Now, before I continue with what might be the most important story I'll ever tell, I need you to do something for me. This channel exists because of people like you, who take a moment to listen to real stories from real grandmothers who've lived through pain and come out the other side. If this story resonates with you even a little bit, please hit that like button. It takes 1 second and helps this channel reach other people who might need to hear that it's never too late for forgiveness. Subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss other stories of hope and second chances. And please, comment below and tell me what you think of this story, or let me know what city or country you're watching from. Every comment, every like, every subscription helps this small channel grow and reach more people who need to know they're not alone. Your support means the world to me and to this community of listeners we're building together. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. My name is Helen Marie Parker, and I was born in Akron, Ohio, in March of 1952. My maiden name was Sullivan, and I grew up in a working-class Irish-American family where love was shown through actions rather than words, and pride was valued almost as much as faith. I met Thomas Parker when I was 23 years old, working as a first-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary School in Cleveland. He came to fix the boiler in the middle of January 1975, and I remember thinking he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen on a man. He was a mechanic, worked with his hands his whole life, had grease under his fingernails that never quite came clean, no matter how hard he scrubbed. But those hands built our whole life together. We got married in June of 1976 in a small Catholic church in Cleveland Heights, with maybe 40 people in attendance. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just real love and real promises. We moved into a little 2-bedroom house on Maple Avenue on the east side of Cleveland, a neighborhood of tree-lined streets and modest homes, where everyone knew everyone else's business but also brought you casseroles when you were sick. Thomas and I tried for 4 years to have a baby, 4 years of hope and disappointment, of doctor visits and prayers, of watching my friends push strollers through the park while my arms stayed empty. I'd almost given up by the time David was born in August of 1980. I was 28 years old, and when they placed that tiny baby in my arms, I cried so hard the nurses got worried. David was our miracle, our only child, our entire world. I stayed home with him for the first 3 years, then went back to teaching part-time when he started preschool. Thomas worked long hours at Hendrick's Auto Shop on Euclid Avenue, sometimes 6 days a week, but he never missed David's baseball games or school concerts. We weren't rich, far from it. There were months when we had to choose between fixing the furnace and buying David new shoes for school. But we were happy. We were a family. Cleveland in the 1980s and 90s was a city trying to find its footing again after the rough years of the 70s. The steel mills were closing, factories were moving south, and a lot of families were struggling. But our neighborhood held together. We had block parties in the summer, went to church on Sundays, shoveled each other's driveways in winter. It was the kind of community where you could send your kid to ride his bike around the block and know that Mrs. Henderson would be watching from her porch, and Mr. Kowalski would make sure no cars were going too fast. David grew up in that house on Maple Avenue. We marked his height on the kitchen door frame every birthday. I can still see those pencil marks, even though I painted over them years ago. He learned to ride a bike on our driveway, broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard when he was 9, had his first kiss with Jenny Martinez from 3 houses down when he was 14. He was a good kid, not perfect. No kid is perfect, but good. He got decent grades, played second base on his high school baseball team, worked part-time at the grocery store on the weekends to save money for college. He wanted to be an architect from the time he was 12 years old, spent hours drawing elaborate buildings and cities in his notebooks. Thomas and I were so proud when David got accepted to Kent State University in 1998. We couldn't afford to pay for all of it, but between his part-time job, some small scholarships, and us scraping together what we could, he made it work. He came home most weekends, brought his laundry and his appetite, told us about his classes and his friends, and eventually about a girl named Sarah. Sarah Chen was a business major, smart as a whip, beautiful in that effortless way some young women have. David brought her home for Thanksgiving in 2002, and I could see he was head over heels. They got married in 2004, small wedding, mostly because Sarah's parents were helping pay, and they wanted to keep it modest. I liked Sarah well enough. She was polite, ambitious, always had her phone in her hand checking work emails even on Sundays. David graduated in 2002, got hired by a good firm in Boston in 2004, right after the wedding, and suddenly my boy was living 6 hours away. It hurt, but I understood. That's what parents are supposed to do. Raise their children to fly away from them. Thomas and I visited a few times a year, and David and Sarah came back for holidays. Then Thomas died in June of 2008. Heart attack. Sudden. He was 56 years old, went to work one morning complaining about heartburn, and by noon, he was gone. I got the call at school, and I remember Mrs. Peterson, the principal, driving me to the hospital even though I already knew he was dead. You can feel it, that moment when half of yourself stops existing in the world. David came home immediately, helped me with the funeral arrangements, stayed for 2 weeks. But then he had to go back to Boston, back to his life, his job, his wife. And I was alone in that house on Maple Avenue for the first time in 32 years. The next few years were hard. I kept teaching because I needed something to fill my days, needed the noise of children to drown out the silence of my house. David called every Sunday like clockwork. He and Sarah visited for Christmas and usually once in the summer. We Skyped. I learned how to use a computer just so I could see my son's face more often. But I could tell something was wrong with David's marriage. You don't raise a child for 28 years without learning to read the tiny shifts in his voice, the things he doesn't say. Sarah was in the background less and less during our video calls. David stopped mentioning couple friends or weekend plans. When I asked how things were, he'd say, "Fine," in that tone that meant, "Don't ask more questions." In 2015, David told me they were separating. By early 2016, the divorce was final. I was 64 years old by then, retired from teaching, living on Social Security, and Thomas's small pension. David was 36, dealing with a divorce, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Boston, throwing himself into work. He started calling less frequently. Our video calls got shorter. I could hear the pain in his voice, and it killed me. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. Looking back now, I can see all the ways I should have kept my mouth shut, all the words I should have swallowed instead of speaking. But at the time, I was a mother watching her only child suffer, and I thought I was helping. It was April 2016, late on a Thursday night. David called, which was unusual because our standing call was Sundays at 7 p.m. I could tell immediately he'd been drinking. Not drunk, but enough to loosen his tongue, enough to let the pain come through. He told me about the divorce settlement, about how Sarah was keeping their condo because she could afford the mortgage, about how he was splitting his 401k with her, about how she'd started dating someone from her work already, some vice president in his 40s who drove a BMW and took her to restaurants David never could have afforded. "I gave her everything, Ma," he said, and his voice broke. 10 years of my life. I worked 60-hour weeks to build a life for us, and she just moved on like I was nothing. I was sitting in my living room, in Thomas's old recliner that I couldn't bring myself to get rid of, holding the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "Maybe she was never the right woman for you," I said, and then I added, "I never thought she really appreciated you anyway. She was always more interested in her career than in being a real wife." The silence that followed those words was different than any silence I'd experienced before. It was the sound of something breaking that I didn't know could break. "What did you just say?" David's voice had gone completely flat. "I just meant, no, Ma. What did you say about Sarah not being a real wife?" I should have backed off, should have apologized right then. But I was 64 years old, raised in a time when wives supported their husbands, when family came before career, and I let my outdated ideas tumble out of my mouth like poison. "I'm just saying, honey. She was always working, always traveling for business. When were you supposed to build a life together when she was never home? A marriage needs—" "Stop." His voice was hard now, harder than I'd ever heard it. "Just stop talking, Mom." "David, I'm trying to help." "Help? You think blaming my wife for our divorce is helping? You think telling me she wasn't a real wife because she had a career is helping? I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did. That's exactly what you meant. And you know what? Maybe the problem wasn't that Sarah worked too much. Maybe the problem was that I wasn't enough for her. Maybe the problem was me. Did you ever think of that?" "Of course not, sweetheart. You're wonderful, you're—" "And maybe," he continued, his voice getting louder, "maybe I don't need my mother telling me that my ex-wife wasn't a real wife, when the truth is, I'm the one who failed. I'm the one who couldn't make her happy. I'm the one who lost her. David, please. I called you because I needed my mom. I needed someone to listen to me fall apart. And instead, You're criticizing Sarah, making judgments about our marriage like you know anything about it. I was just trying. I know what you were trying to do. You were trying to make me feel better by making her the villain. But she's not a villain, Mom. She's a person who stopped loving me, and that's not her fault. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. No, you shouldn't have. He took a breath, and I could hear him trying to compose himself. I can't do this right now. I need to go. David, wait. I'll call you later. When? I don't know. Later. He hung up. I sat in that recliner for 2 hours, phone still in my hand, replaying every word. I should have called him back immediately. Should have apologized properly. Not the weak, I'm sorry. I'd offered, but a real apology that acknowledged how wrong I'd been, how hurtful my words were. But I didn't call, because I was hurt too. Hurt that he'd yelled at me when I was just trying to comfort him. Hurt that he'd chosen his ex-wife's honor over his own mother's concern. That was my second mistake. My pride wouldn't let me pick up the phone. Sunday came and our usual 7 p.m. call time passed. No call from David. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. It didn't. I called him on Monday. It went to voicemail. I left a message. Hi, honey. Just checking in. Call me when you can. Love you. No response. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I called every day. Left messages every day. The messages went from casual to concerned to desperate. David, please call me. I'm worried about you. Sweetheart, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. David, it's been a week. Please just let me know you're okay. On Friday, he sent a text. Just one line. I'm fine. Need some space. Don't call for a while. Space. He needed space. I thought a while meant a few weeks, maybe a month. I didn't know that a while would become 10 years. The first few months, I still called occasionally. Left voicemails on his birthday, on Thanksgiving, on Christmas. Short messages. Thinking of you. Love you. Call when you're ready. He never responded. I sent emails, cards to his apartment address. Nothing got returned, so I knew he was getting them. But no reply. No acknowledgement. Just silence. 6 months became a year. I told myself he just needed more time, that he'd call eventually, that we'd work it out. Year 1 became year 2. I started having imaginary conversations with him in my head, practicing what I'd say when he finally called. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Year 2 became year 3. I stopped calling, stopped sending cards. Because what was the point? He'd made his choice. He didn't want me in his life anymore. Year 3 became year 5. I learned to live with the silence. Learned to wake up every morning without hope that today might be the day he'd reach out. Learned to push down the pain so deep that sometimes I could go whole weeks without thinking about him. That's a lie. I thought about him every single day, every single hour. His absence was a physical ache in my chest that never went away. Year 5 became year 10. By then I'd convinced myself this was just how my life was now. I was a mother whose son had left and never come back. It happened to other women, and now it had happened to me. But every Christmas, every single Christmas, was the worst. Because Christmas had been our time. The one holiday David always came home for, no matter what. Even when he lived in Boston with Sarah, even during their divorce year, he'd always been home for Christmas. The first Christmas without him, in 2016, I decorated anyway. Put up the tree, hung the stockings, baked the cookies. Kept thinking he might surprise me. might show up at the door with an awkward smile and say, "Sorry I'm late, Ma." He didn't come. I sat in front of that decorated tree on Christmas Eve and cried until my throat hurt. The second Christmas, I almost didn't decorate, but at the last minute, I couldn't help myself. Put up a smaller tree, fewer decorations. Still baked his favorite snickerdoodles, even though there was no one to eat them. Still waited for a call that didn't come. By the fifth Christmas, the decorating had become a ritual of grief. I knew he wasn't coming, knew he wouldn't call. But I decorated anyway because not decorating felt like admitting he was really gone forever. And I couldn't do that, couldn't admit it. By the 10th Christmas, this Christmas 2026, I'd perfected the art of pretending to be okay. I decorated my house not because I thought David would come, but because the neighbors expected it. Helen Parker always decorates for Christmas, rain or shine, heartbreak or not. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of gossip, of whispered conversations about poor Helen all alone, her son abandoned her. I bought a small turkey breast because cooking a proper Christmas dinner gave me something to do on Christmas Day besides sit in silence. I baked cookies because my hands remembered the motions, and my kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar instead of loneliness. I played Christmas music because without it, the silence of my house was unbearable. I did all of these things, but I did them with the absolute certainty that I would spend Christmas alone, just like I had for the past 9 years. That certainty made it possible to function, to get through another holiday season without falling apart. Which is why, when the doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, I was completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Recalibrated section structure and word count targets. I need to check my word count so far. Let me estimate. Opening, in medias res start. 370 words, CTA, 150 words. Background section start, BAM 2, 500 words. So I'm at approximately 020 words total. I need to complete section 2 to reach 2,0002, 500 words for that section specifically. But the opening CTA is part of section 1. Let me recalculate. Section 1, opening, 520 words. I need 701,00, so I need to add more to section 1. Actually, looking back, my section 1 should be the opening through the CTA. Let me recount. Opening scene at door. Broad 370 words. CTA, 150 words. Total section 1. Well, of 520 words, I need 701,000 for section 1, so I need about 480 more words before moving to section 2. Actually, rereading the structure, I think my opening through the you need to understand part is section 1. Then the background is section 2. Let me continue properly. Current section 1 count. 520 words. Need 701,000 words. Must add 480 more words to section 1. Then section 2, background, needs to be 2,002, 500 words. I've already written quite a bit that should be in section 2. Let me reorganize mentally. Section 1 should be opening at the door. Plus CTA plus. Brief transition section 2 should be full background and context. I'll continue developing and make sure each section hits its target. I need to tell you something about pride. About the specific kind of pride that Irish-American families pass down through generations. Like a family heirloom, made of steel and stubbornness. My mother had it. Her mother had it. And God help me, I passed it on to David too. That pride was what kept me from picking up the phone after his text saying he needed space. That pride whispered in my ear. If he wants space, give him space. Don't chase after him like a pathetic old woman. He knows where you live. He knows your number. Let him come to you. So I waited, and the waiting turned into years, and the pride turned into a wall so high and thick that neither of us could see over it anymore. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Helen, you're his mother. You should have kept trying. Should have driven to Boston and banged on his door until he talked to you. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have. But here's what you don't understand, unless you've lived it. After a certain point, the silence becomes its own language. The silence starts to mean something. It means, I don't forgive you. I don't want you in my life. Stay away. And eventually, you start to believe that silence. You start to think that maybe your child is better off without you. That maybe you're toxic, harmful, someone he needed to cut out of his life to be happy. So you stop trying, because you love him. And if staying away is what he needs, then you stay away, even if it kills you a little more every single day. I grew up in Akron during the late 1950s and 60s in a neighborhood where Irish, Polish, and Italian families lived side by side in small houses with even smaller yards. My father, Patrick Sullivan, worked at Goodyear Tire for 38 years. My mother, Kathleen, kept house and raised 5 children on a factory worker's salary that barely stretched far enough. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We wore hand-me-down clothes, ate meatless dinners on Fridays not just for religious reasons, but because meat was expensive, and entertainment meant sitting on the front porch, watching neighbors walk by. The greatest luxury of my childhood was when Dad brought home ice cream on Saturday nights in summer. Plain vanilla, in a cardboard container split 5 ways among me and my siblings. I was the second oldest, with an older brother named Patrick Jr., 2 younger sisters, Margaret and Colleen, and a baby brother, Sean. We shared bedrooms, shared bathrooms, shared everything. Privacy wasn't a concept we understood. Neither was therapy or talking about your feelings or any of the things young people today take for granted. In our house, you didn't complain. You didn't cry unless you were seriously injured. You didn't talk back to adults. You went to church on Sunday, confession on Saturday, and you didn't ask questions about why things were the way they were. My mother showed love by making sure we had clean clothes and full bellies. My father showed love by working 12-hour shifts so we could have those things. I love you wasn't a phrase I heard until I was an adult, but I never doubted I was loved. It just wasn't spoken out loud. That was the world I knew, the world that shaped me. I was a good student, despite sharing a bedroom with 2 sisters and doing homework at the kitchen table, while Mom cooked dinner and the baby cried. I liked school, liked the order of it, the rules, the clear expectations. I especially liked reading. It was free entertainment, free escape. When I told my parents I wanted to go to college to become a teacher, Dad looked at me like I'd suggested flying to the moon. College was for rich families, or for boys who needed good careers. Girls got secretarial training if they were lucky, then worked until they got married and had babies. But Mom surprised me. She took me aside one evening while I was washing dishes, and she said in a low voice so Dad wouldn't hear, "There's a teacher's college in Kent. It's cheap. You could live at home and take the bus." That's how I ended up at Kent State, commuting an hour each way, working part-time at Woolworths to pay for books and supplies, living at home until I was 23 years old. I graduated in 1975 with a teaching certificate and a job lined up at Lincoln Elementary in Cleveland. That's when I met Thomas. He was 30 years old to my 23. Had dropped out of high school at 16 to work and help support his family, taught himself everything he knew about engines and mechanics through pure determination and library books. He'd never been married, which was unusual for a man his age in 1975. When I asked him why, he said simply, "Never met the right woman before." Thomas was nothing like the boys I dated in college. He didn't care about poetry or philosophy or any of the intellectual things I thought I wanted in a husband. He cared about fixing things that were broken, making things work again, taking care of people. He courted me the old-fashioned way, picked me up for dates in his truck that always smelled like motor oil, brought me flowers he bought from the grocery store, opened doors, pulled out chairs, asked my father's permission before proposing. We got married in 1976, and I moved from my parents' house in Akron to our little house on Maple Avenue in Cleveland. 23 years old, married, starting my career as a teacher. I thought I had it all figured out. Then came 4 years of trying to have a baby. 4 years of negative pregnancy tests and doctor appointments and well-meaning relatives asking when we were going to start a family, as if we weren't already a family, just the two of us. 4 years of my mother-in-law suggesting maybe I should quit my job and focus on being a wife. 4 years of watching my younger sister Margaret pop out 3 babies in the time it took me to have none. 4 years of going to baby showers and christenings and birthday parties, smiling through the pain, pretending I was happy for everyone else while dying inside. By 1980, I'd almost given up, almost convinced myself that maybe this was God's plan, that maybe I wasn't meant to be a mother. Thomas and I had even started talking about adoption, looking into agencies, filling out paperwork. Then I missed a period. Then another. I didn't let myself hope. I'd been disappointed too many times before. But when the doctor confirmed it, when he showed me the ultrasound and pointed to that tiny flickering heartbeat, I sobbed so hard Thomas had to pull the car over on the drive home because I couldn't breathe. David was born on August 12, 1980, at Cleveland Metro Hospital. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect in every way. I held him and counted his fingers and toes 3 times, just to make sure they were all there. I stared at his tiny face and couldn't believe that this person, this whole, entire person, had come from me. The nurses had to pry him out of my arms so I could sleep. Even then, I kept reaching for the bassinet beside my bed, touching him to make sure he was real. For the first year of his life, I barely slept. Not because he was a difficult baby. He wasn't. But because I was terrified something would happen to him. That I'd wake up and he'd be gone. That this miracle I'd waited so long for would be taken away. Thomas used to find me at 3 a.m. standing beside David's crib, just watching him breathe. "He's okay, Helen," Thomas would say gently, guiding me back to bed. "He's fine. You need to sleep." But I couldn't, because David wasn't just my baby. He was my only baby, my miracle, my everything. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I loved him too much, held on too tight, couldn't imagine a world where he didn't need me. Maybe that's why, when he did finally pull away, I couldn't handle it with any kind of grace. Cleveland in the 1980s was a city trying to reinvent itself. The steel industry was dying, manufacturing was moving overseas, and neighborhoods that had been thriving working-class communities were starting to struggle. Our neighborhood on Maple Avenue held on better than most, mainly because the people who lived there were stubborn and proud and refused to give up on their homes, even when property values dropped and stores closed. Thomas worked at Hendrick's Auto Shop, a family-owned garage that had been in business since 1952. The owner, Sam Hendricks, was a fair man who paid decent wages and didn't cheat his customers. Thomas started as a general mechanic in 1968 and worked his way up to shop foreman by 1985. He was good at what he did, really good. People would drive from across town specifically to have Thomas Parker work on their cars. The job didn't pay a lot, but it was steady. We had health insurance through the shop. We could pay our mortgage, keep food on the table, occasionally take David to Cedar Point Amusement Park in the summer as a special treat. I taught first grade at Lincoln Elementary, a job I loved despite the challenges. My students came from working-class families like mine, kids whose parents worked hard but didn't have much. I taught them to read, to write, to believe that education could be their ticket to something better. I kept pictures of every class I ever taught, boxes and boxes of them in our basement, young faces that I still remember decades later. Teaching didn't pay much either, but between Thomas's salary and mine, we made it work. We didn't take vacations beyond day trips. We didn't eat out at restaurants except for birthdays. We didn't buy new furniture unless something broke beyond repair. But we were comfortable. We were happy. David grew up in that environment of careful budgeting and hard work. He knew from a young age that money didn't grow on trees, that nothing came for free, that if you wanted something, you had to work for it. He got his first job at 14, bagging groceries at the Finast supermarket on Coventry Road. Worked there through high school, saved every penny for college. Thomas and I were so proud of his work ethic, his determination, his focus on building a future for himself. When he told us he wanted to be an architect, I didn't even know what architects did beyond drawing buildings. But I could see the light in his eyes when he talked about it. The way he'd spend hours sketching impossible structures in his notebooks, imagining cities that didn't exist yet. "I want to build things that last," he told me once when he was 16, showing me a drawing of a skyscraper he'd designed. "I want to make something permanent." I should have known then that he was talking about more than buildings. He was talking about legacy, about leaving a mark on the world, about being more than just another working-class kid from Cleveland. When he got into Kent State's architecture program in 1998, we threw a party in our backyard. 20 people showed up, neighbors, Thomas's co-workers, my teaching colleagues, David's friends from high school. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, drank cheap beer, celebrated like David had just won the lottery. Because, in a way, he had. College was the lottery for kids like us. It was the door out of factory jobs and paycheck-to-paycheck living. It was the chance to be something different, something more. I remember Thomas pulling me aside during that party, putting his arm around my waist and saying, "We did good, Helen. Look at our boy. We did real good." He was right. We had done good. If only I'd remembered that 16 years later, when David's marriage fell apart, and he needed his mother to just listen instead of judge. If only I'd remembered that the boy who wanted to build things that last had seen his marriage crumble and felt like a failure. If only I'd kept my mouth shut and my outdated opinions to myself. But I didn't, and by the time I realized my mistake, the damage was already done. The years after Thomas died were the loneliest of my life, even before David stopped calling. I was 62 when Thomas had his heart attack, and suddenly I was navigating widowhood in a house that felt too big and too quiet. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach for him, forgetting for those first few seconds that he was gone, and the remembering hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. People brought casseroles, sent cards, showed up at the funeral with tears in their eyes and promises to be there for you, Helen, anything you need. But after a few weeks, life moved on. People went back to their own lives, their own problems, and I was left alone with my grief and a house full of memories. I kept teaching for 6 more years, partly because I needed the income and partly because I needed a reason to get out of bed in the morning. My students kept me going. Their energy, their questions, their absolute confidence that tomorrow would be better than today. It gave me something to hold on to. David called every Sunday. I lived for those calls. They were my anchor, My reminder that I still had family, still had someone in the world who cared whether I lived or died. He'd tell me about work, about the buildings he was designing, about Boston and its quirks and its traffic. I'd tell him about my students, about the neighbors, about the weather in Cleveland. We'd talk for 30-40 minutes, and for that brief window of time I didn't feel so alone. I could hear the strain in his marriage even before he told me about it. The way Sarah's name appeared less and less in his stories. The way he'd changed the subject when I asked how she was doing. The way his voice sounded tired, defeated, older than 35 years had any right to make him. When he finally told me about the separation in 2015, I wanted to get in my car and drive to Boston. Wanted to hold my son the way I'd held him when he was a baby. When I could fix his problems by changing his diaper or giving him a bottle. But he was 35 years old, and his problems couldn't be fixed by his mother anymore. I should have understood that, should have accepted it, should have just listened when he called me that night, in April 2016, drunk and hurting and falling apart. Instead, I tried to make it better the only way I knew how, by taking his side, by making his ex-wife the villain, by giving him someone to blame, besides himself. And in doing so, I became someone he needed to cut out of his life. The first year of silence was agony. I called him on his birthday in August 2016, straight to voicemail. Called him on Thanksgiving, straight to voicemail. Called him on Christmas, straight to voicemail. I sent cards. Long letters apologizing, explaining, begging him to forgive me. They never came back as undeliverable, so I knew he was getting them. But no response. By the second year, I'd stopped calling, but I still sent cards on his birthday and Christmas. Just simple ones. Thinking of you. Love you always. Mom. By the third year, I'd accepted that this was my reality now. I had a son who was alive somewhere in the world, but I would never see him again, never talk to him again, never know if he was happy or sad or healthy or sick. It was a special kind of grief, mourning someone who wasn't dead, missing someone who had chosen to disappear from my life. I retired from teaching in 2014, 2 years before David stopped talking to me. So at least I had that transition out of the way before I lost my son. I couldn't imagine trying to show up for 25 first graders every day while carrying that kind of pain. Retirement should have been the beginning of a new chapter. Travel, hobbies, volunteer work, spending time with grandchildren. That's what the retirement seminars promised. Instead, my retirement was doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, gardening in the summer, and a whole lot of silence. I joined a book club at the local library. Lasted 3 months before I couldn't stand the pitying looks from the other women, all of whom seemed to have children and grandchildren, who called them regularly, who visited, who cared. I volunteered at the food bank. That lasted a little longer, maybe a year, until one of the other volunteers made a comment about how sad it must be to have all this free time and no family to spend it with. I smiled and agreed and never went back. Mostly, I just existed. Woke up, made coffee, watched the news, did crossword puzzles, went to bed, repeat. Sundays were the worst. Sundays used to be phone calls with David. Now Sundays were just another day of silence, but with the added weight of remembering what used to be. The house on Maple Avenue, which had always been full of noise and life and love, became a mausoleum of memories. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. Thomas's tools were still in the garage. David's height marks were still on the kitchen door frame, hidden under 3 coats of paint but still there. The furniture was the same furniture we'd bought in 1982 when we finally had enough money to replace the second-hand pieces we'd started with. I was living in a time capsule, surrounded by ghosts. My neighbors knew I was alone. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, would sometimes bring me extra zucchini from her garden, stay and chat for 10 minutes about nothing in particular. Mr. Kowalski across the street would snow-blow my driveway in winter without being asked, wave away my thanks with a gruff, "It's nothing." These small kindnesses kept me human, kept me connected to the world, even if just barely. But they couldn't fill the David-shaped hole in my life. Nothing could. Christmas became my annual ritual of grief. That first Christmas without David, in December 2016. I couldn't decide whether to decorate or not. Spent weeks going back and forth. Finally, on December 15th, I hauled the boxes down from the attic. Told myself I was decorating for me, not for him. Told myself I wasn't going to spend the holidays staring at bare walls feeling sorry for myself. I put up a 7-foot tree in the living room, the same fake tree we'd been using since 2003. Hung the ornaments David had made in elementary school. Construction paper angels with googly eyes, popsicle stick stars covered in glitter, a clay handprint from first grade that was so small it broke my heart to look at. Strung the lights around the front porch, hung the wreath on the door, set out the nativity scene on the mantel. Every single action felt like I was building my own torture device. I baked cookies, chocolate chip, snickerdoodles, Russian tea cakes, all the ones David loved. Put them in containers, froze them, then threw them out in January, because what was I going to do with 12 dozen cookies when I lived alone? On Christmas Eve, I sat in front of that decorated tree with the lights twinkling and Bing Crosby on the stereo, and I cried until I thought I might actually die from the pain of it. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the moment he'll realize he's being ridiculous and call me. He'll hear White Christmas and remember all our Christmases together and pick up the phone. He didn't call. The second Christmas, 2017, I scaled back. Smaller tree, fewer decorations, didn't bake as many cookies. But I still decorated because the alternative was admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. Still waited for a call that didn't come. The third Christmas, 2018, I almost didn't decorate at all. Sat in my living room on December 1st, staring at the boxes from the attic, trying to find the energy to care. Mrs. Henderson saw me through the window and knocked on my door. "You doing okay, Helen?" she asked, concern in her watery blue eyes. "Fine." I lied. "Just tired." "You decorating this year?" I shrugged. "Haven't decided." She looked at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "You know what I think? I think we decorate for ourselves, not for other people. If it brings you joy, do it. If it doesn't, don't. But don't let anyone else's absence determine how you live your life." She was talking about David, even though I'd never told her about our estrangement. Small neighborhoods like ours don't have secrets. That night I put up the tree. Not for David, not hoping he'd come. But for me. Because I deserved to have Christmas, even if I was spending it alone. That became my approach for the next 7 years. Decorate because I wanted to, not because I was hoping for anything. Bake cookies because I liked the smell of them in the oven, even if I ended up giving most of them away to neighbors. Play Christmas music because it filled the silence. Each year, I'd have a moment on Christmas Eve where I'd let myself imagine what it would be like if David walked through the door. Imagine his surprise at seeing the tree, the decorations, the cookies. Imagine him saying, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Then I'd push the fantasy away and go to bed, alone. Year after year after year. By Christmas 2025, last year, I'd perfected the art of celebrating alone without falling apart. Put up the tree on December 10th, baked cookies on December 20th, went to Christmas Eve service at St. Ignatius Church, came home, watched It's a Wonderful Life, and went to bed by 10 p.m. No crying, no waiting for phone calls, no false hope, just acceptance. This was my life now. So when December 2026 rolled around, and I started preparing for what I thought would be my 11th Christmas alone, I had no reason to think this year would be any different. I put up the tree on December 8th, strung the lights on the porch on December 12th, baked the first batch of cookies, snickerdoodles, on December 18th, December 24th, 2026. Started like every other Christmas Eve I'd spent alone. Woke up at 7 a.m., made coffee, did the crossword puzzle from the Cleveland Plain dealer, watched the news, started soup for dinner around 4 p.m. because it was easy, and I didn't have to think about it. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine needles. The tree lights were on. Nat King Cole was playing softly in the background. Everything was exactly as it should be. I was stirring that soup, thinking about what movie I'd watch later. White Christmas, or Miracle on 34th Street, when the doorbell rang. 6:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and someone was at my door. Assessed progress and architected detailed narrative structure ahead. I need to check my progress. Let me estimate my word count so far. Section 1, opening. Approximately 800 words, Section 2, background and context. Approximately 600 words total so far. Diorama 3, 400 words. I'm making good progress. Section 1 was 701,000 words. Target met. Section 2 was 2,002, 500 words. Slightly over but within tolerance. Now I need to continue with Section 3, development, established life. 3,504,000 words. Section 4, tension escalation. 2,503,000 words. Section 5, discovery to climax. 2,002, 500 words. Section 6, resolution planning. 4,004, 500 words. Section 7, resolution execution. 3,500 to 4,000 words. Section 8, consequences. 2,500 to 3,000 words. Section 9, closing. 1,001, 300 words. I need to develop Section 3 now, which needs to include apparently stable initial situation. 700 words. Building relationships. Life according to title context. 700 words. Daily situation development. 500 words. Introduction of disruptive element, according to the story. 700 words. List of subtle conflict signs. 6 to 8 well-developed events of 200, 300 words each. 1, 200 to 2. 400 words. Specific time markers relevant to the narrative. 500 words. For this story, Section 3 needs to cover the 10 years of silence in detail. The warning signs that maybe reconciliation was still possible. Moments where Helen almost reached out again. Etc. My hand froze on the wooden spoon. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I set the spoon down carefully, turned off the burner, and walked toward the front door like a woman in a dream. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a 74-year-old woman with gray hair and wide, frightened eyes, who rings doorbells on Christmas Eve at 6:47 p.m. Jehovah's Witnesses took the holidays off. The mail didn't run. My neighbors knew better. I wasn't expecting any deliveries. My hand reached for the doorknob and I noticed it was shaking. I took a breath, steadied myself, and opened the door. David, my son, my boy, standing on my porch after 10 years of silence. He'd aged. Of course he had. 10 years will do that to a person. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray at his temples that made him look distinguished and heartbreakingly like his father. He'd lost weight, looked tired, worn down by whatever life had thrown at him in the decade since we'd last spoken. He was wearing a navy peacoat that looked expensive, Better quality than anything I'd ever seen him wear before. A worn leather suitcase sat at his feet. In his right hand, he held a small wrapped present with paper that looked like he'd wrapped it himself. Slightly crooked corners and too much tape. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at this man, who was my son, but also a stranger, familiar and foreign, all at once. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, deep and rough, like he'd been crying, or maybe just like 10 years had passed, and changed everything about both of us. "David," I whispered. It was all I could manage. "I'm home," he said. Then he swallowed hard, and I saw tears in his eyes. "If you still want me. If I still wanted him. If I still wanted him." Like there was any universe in which I wouldn't want my son. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere in my chest, trapped under 10 years of pain and longing and grief. Instead, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him, and he dropped the present and the suitcase and held on to me like he was drowning, and I was the only thing keeping him afloat. We stood there on my front porch in Cleveland, Ohio, on Christmas Eve 2026, holding each other while the snow that had been threatening all day finally started to fall. Soft, gentle flakes that caught in his hair and melted on my cheeks, mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back anymore. "I'm sorry," he said into my shoulder, his voice muffled and broken. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Shh," I said, stroking his hair the way I used to when he was small and had nightmares. "You're here now. That's all that matters." But even as I said it, even as I held him, a part of my brain was screaming questions. Why now? Why after 10 years? What happened to bring him back? Is he okay? Is he in trouble? Is this real, or am I having some kind of breakdown? I pushed the questions away. They didn't matter. Not right now. Right now, my son was home, and that was enough. We finally pulled apart, both of us crying, both of us laughing a little at how ridiculous we must look. David picked up his suitcase and the present. I held the door open, and he walked into the house he'd grown up in, the house he hadn't set foot in for 10 years. He stopped in the hallway, looking around like he'd never seen it before. His eyes took in the tree in the living room, the lights, the decorations, the stockings hung by the fireplace. 2 stockings, his and mine, even though I'd spent the last 10 years alone. "You kept my stocking," he said, and fresh tears spilled down his face. "Of course I did," I said. "You're my son. Nothing changes that." He turned to me, and the look on his face was pure devastation. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," I agreed, trying for lightness even though my voice was shaking. "But you're stuck with me anyway." That made him laugh, a wet, broken sound that somehow felt like the most beautiful thing I'd heard in years. "Come on," I said, taking his arm. "Soup's on the stove. You must be hungry. When did you eat last? Breakfast, maybe? I drove straight through from Boston." "You drove? In this weather?" "I was afraid if I waited, I'd lose my nerve." I led him to the kitchen, made him sit at the table, poured him a bowl of soup, put bread and butter in front of him. Watched him eat like I used to watch him when he was little, making sure he was getting enough, making sure he was okay. We didn't talk about the 10 years. Not yet. We just sat in my kitchen while the snow fell outside, and the Christmas music played softly in the background. And slowly, carefully, we started to remember how to be mother and son again. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was going to be the best Christmas of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. To really understand what that doorbell ringing meant, you need to know about the 10 years that came before it, the signs I missed, the moments when reconciliation could have happened but didn't, the slow, painful evolution of grief into acceptance. You need to understand how I got to the point where I'd given up hope entirely, because only then can you understand the miracle of what happened next. The first year after David stopped talking to me was a masterclass in false hope. Every single day I woke up thinking, maybe today he'll call. Every time my phone rang, my heart would leap. Every time it wasn't him, it would sink a little lower. I kept my phone with me constantly, charged it obsessively, checked it every 5 minutes to make sure I hadn't missed a call or text. I was like a teenage girl waiting for a boy to call, except I was 64 years old, and the boy was my son, and the waiting felt like it might actually kill me. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't completely written me off came in October 2016, about 6 months after our fight. I was at the grocery store, Heinen's on Coventry Road, doing my weekly shopping. Nothing special, just the usual. Milk, bread, coffee, whatever vegetables were on sale. I was in the produce section trying to decide between red and green peppers when I saw a woman I vaguely recognized from church. "Helen!" she called out, waving. "Helen Parker, is that you?" I smiled, trying to place her. Sandra something, worked in the church office. "I thought that was you," she said, coming closer. "Listen, I meant to tell you. I saw your son David last week at the Boston Temple. He looks good. I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but I wanted to let you know I saw him." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You saw David in Boston?" "Yes, at a wedding for my niece. He was there with the groom's family, I think. Old college friend, maybe?" I couldn't breathe. Did he look okay? Healthy?" "Oh yes, very handsome. You must be so proud." I thanked her, finished my shopping in a daze, drove home, and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just processing. David was alive, healthy, going to weddings, living his life. The logical part of my brain said this changed nothing. He still wasn't talking to me, still hadn't forgiven me. But the mother part of my brain latched onto it like a lifeline. He's okay. He's not lying in a ditch somewhere. He's alive and okay. And maybe, just maybe, he'll come around eventually. I held on to that hope for months. The second sign came in March 2017, almost a year after our fight. I got a notification on Facebook. Yes, I was on Facebook. Had joined a few years earlier so I could see pictures of my former students and their families. David had blocked me months earlier, right after our fight, and seeing "You can no longer see David Parker's profile" had felt like a physical blow. But on March 15th, 2017, I got a notification that David had tagged me in a photo. My hands shook as I clicked on it. It was an old picture from 2010. David and Thomas and me at Cedar Point Amusement Park. Thomas had his arm around both of us, all three of us squinting into the sun and grinning. Someone else had taken the picture, probably a kind stranger we'd asked. The caption just said, "Miss you, Dad. 9 years today." March 15th, the anniversary of Thomas's death. I'd completely forgotten. David had tagged me in the photo. Maybe by accident. Maybe he'd meant to crop me out and forgot. But he'd included me. And for the first time in a year, I saw evidence that I still existed in his world, even marginally. I stared at that photo for hours, memorized every pixel. The way Thomas's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. The way David leaned into his father. The way I looked happy. Genuinely happy. In a way I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to comment. Wanted to write something. Anything. I miss him too. I miss you both. Please talk to me. But I didn't. I was terrified that if I reached out he'd remove the tag. Block me completely. I couldn't bear that. So I just liked the photo. A single pathetic click of a button that said, I see you. I remember this. I miss it too. He didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge it. But he didn't remove the tag either. I took that as a good sign. Looking back now, I realize I was reading tea leaves, finding meaning in meaningless things because I was desperate for any connection to my son. The third sign was more substantial. It came in August 2017, on David's 37th birthday. I'd sent him a card like I did every year. Nothing elaborate, just a simple birthday card with a message. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Thinking of you today and every day. Love always, Mom. I never expected a response. Hadn't gotten one for any of the other cards I'd sent. But 3 days after his birthday, I got a text message from his number. Just 3 words. Thank you. David. I must have read those 3 words 1,000 times, analyzed them from every angle. What did they mean? Was he softening? Was this an opening? Should I respond? I wrote and deleted 50 different responses. Finally settled on something simple. You're welcome, honey. I love you. He didn't respond to that, but he'd broken the silence, however briefly. That had to mean something. I convinced myself it meant he was ready to talk, ready to forgive, that any day now, he'd call. He didn't call. The 4th sign came in December 2017, that second Christmas. I'd sent my usual Christmas card. Merry Christmas, David. You're always in my thoughts. Love, Mom. And didn't expect anything in return. But on December 27th, I got a card in the mail. A Christmas card. Generic winter scene with a church. No personal message inside. Just printed text, saying season's greetings, and a signature. David. That was it. No letter, no explanation, no olive branch. Just acknowledgement that I existed. I put that card on my mantle and looked at it every single day for months. Physical proof that my son remembered I was alive. Physical proof that somewhere in Boston, he'd thought about me enough to buy a card, address an envelope, put a stamp on it. It wasn't much, but it was something. The 5th sign was more painful. It came in June 2018, 2 years after our fight. I was having lunch with my old teaching colleague, Martha Reynolds, at a diner in Shaker Heights. Martha had kept in touch after I retired, made an effort to get together every few months. She was good people, kind without being pitying. We were halfway through our sandwiches when Martha said, almost casually, "Oh, I meant to tell you. My daughter Lisa bumped into David at some professional conference in Chicago last month. She said he seems to be doing really well. Got a promotion or something?" I set down my sandwich carefully. David was in Chicago. Yeah, some architecture thing. Lisa said they only talked for a minute, but he asked about me, about you. Seemed interested in how you were doing. He asked about me. That's what Lisa said. I wanted to demand details. What exactly had he said? How had he looked? Did he seem happy? Sad? Did he mention wanting to call me? But I couldn't ask those questions without revealing the full extent of our estrangement, and I wasn't ready to do that, so I just nodded and said, "That's nice." Inside, I was screaming. He asked about me. He still cares enough to ask about me. I went home that day and almost called him. Stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand for 30 minutes. His number pulled up, my thumb hovering over the call button. But I couldn't do it, because what if he didn't answer? Or worse, what if he did answer and told me to leave him alone? The hope that he might eventually forgive me was the only thing keeping me going. If he explicitly rejected me, if he said the words out loud, I don't think I could have survived it. So I didn't call, and the moment passed. The 6th sign came in April 2019, 3 years after our fight. I got an email from a Cleveland Clinic employee, benefits administrator. They were updating their records and needed confirmation that I'd removed my son from my emergency contact list, as he'd indicated he needed to be removed. I stared at that email for an hour. David had actively asked to be removed as my emergency contact. He'd taken a deliberate step to distance himself from me in a formal, legal way. This wasn't just silence anymore. This was active rejection. I should have removed him right then. Should have listed a neighbor or a friend. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, because removing David as my emergency contact felt like admitting he was really gone, like acknowledging that if something happened to me, he wouldn't want to know. I never responded to that email. They probably followed up with phone calls, but I ignored those too. For all I know, David is still listed as my emergency contact, even though he doesn't want to be. Sometimes pride and hope look a lot alike. The 7th sign came in November 2019, just before Thanksgiving. I was at the library, returning books, when I overheard 2 women talking. One of them was going through a divorce, and she was telling her friend about a support group she'd joined. It's specifically for people dealing with family estrangement, she said. Parents who haven't talked to their kids in years, siblings who've cut each other off, that kind of thing. It's been really helpful. I froze in place, pretending to browse the new release shelf while I listened. "How do you find out about it?" her friend asked. "A guy in my divorce support group told me about it. Said it changed his life, helped him understand why he'd cut off his mother, and how maybe he could fix it someday." A guy in her divorce group who'd cut off his mother. It probably wasn't David. Boston was 6 hours away. This was Cleveland. The odds were tiny. But I went home and searched online for family estrangement support groups in Cleveland. Found one that met monthly at a community center in Lakewood. Spent 2 hours debating whether to go. In the end, I didn't. Because going would mean admitting out loud to strangers that my son had cut me out of his life. Would mean saying the words, family estrangement, and having them apply to me. I wasn't ready for that. The 8th and final sign came in February 2020, right before COVID shut down the world. I got a friend request on Facebook from someone named Jennifer Hartley. I didn't recognize the name, but her profile picture showed a woman about David's age, professional looking, pretty. I accepted the request, curious, and immediately got a message from her. "Hi, Mrs. Parker. You don't know me, but I'm a colleague of David's. He mentioned once that you used to be an elementary school teacher, and I'm looking for advice about becoming a teacher as a career change. Would you be willing to chat sometime? No pressure if not." My heart stopped. David had mentioned me to a colleague, had talked about me enough that this woman knew what I used to do for a living, which meant I wasn't completely erased from his life. Wasn't a secret he was hiding. I responded immediately, said I'd be happy to help, gave her my phone number. We talked for almost an hour. She asked good questions about teaching, about the realities of classroom management and lesson planning and dealing with parents. At the end of the call, I couldn't help myself. I asked, "How is David? Is he doing okay?" There was a pause. Then, "He seems good. Keeps to himself mostly, works a lot, but he seems happy enough." "That's good," I said, fighting back tears. "That's really good." After we hung up, I sat in my living room and cried. Because my son was happy. Happy without me. moving through the world, making connections, helping colleagues, living his life, and I wasn't part of it. That was the moment I truly gave up hope. I stopped looking for signs, stopped analyzing every tiny interaction for hidden meaning, stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I accepted that this was my reality. I had a son who was alive and healthy and happy somewhere in Massachusetts, and I would never see him or talk to him again. Then COVID hit in March 2020, and the whole world shut down, and I spent the next year isolated in my house, and the isolation felt appropriate. It felt like the physical manifestation of what my life had already become. I didn't get COVID, thank God. Got vaccinated as soon as I was eligible in early 2021. Wore my mask, followed the rules, stayed home, and in that enforced isolation, I made peace with my loneliness. Or at least, I told myself I did. The years from 2020 to 2026 blur together in my memory, each one not much different from the last. I developed routines. Routines kept me sane, gave structure to days that otherwise had no purpose. Monday mornings, grocery shopping at Heinen's, same time every week. Tuesday afternoons, library, return old books, check out new ones. Wednesday mornings, doctor's appointments when needed, otherwise household chores. Thursday afternoons, Martha Reynolds for lunch, every other week without fail. Friday mornings, garden work in the warm months, nothing particular in winter. Weekends, church on Sunday morning, crossword puzzles, television, books. I lived like clockwork, predictable, safe, small. I stopped sending David cards after 2022. Figured 4 years of silence was message enough. He didn't want contact, and I needed to respect that, even if it killed me. I removed him from my Facebook entirely in 2023. Couldn't bear seeing his profile picture anymore, wondering what his life looked like, who he was spending time with, whether he ever thought about me. By 2024, I rarely thought about him anymore except on specific dates. His birthday, Christmas, the anniversary of our fight. That's a lie. I thought about him every single day. But I'd gotten better at pushing the thoughts away, at functioning despite the grief. My neighbors probably thought I was doing well. I kept up my house, kept my garden nice, smiled and waved when I saw people. I'm sure they had no idea that every night I went to bed in a house that felt haunted by all the people who weren't there anymore. Thomas, David, the version of myself who used to believe that love was enough to keep a family together. In November 2026, I turned 74. Martha took me to lunch. We went to the same diner we always went to, ordered the same thing we always ordered. She gave me a birthday card with a $20 gift card to Barnes & Noble inside. "Any plans for the big day?" she asked. "This is it," I said, smiling. "Lunch with my favorite person." "What about Christmas? You doing anything special?" "Same as always. Tree, cookies, church service. The usual." She looked at me with that mixture of concern and pity I'd learned to recognize. "Helen, you know you're always welcome to join us for Christmas. My kids would love to see you." "I know," I said. "I appreciate it, but I'm good." I wasn't good, but I'd said it so many times that it had started to feel true. December 2026 came, and I went through my usual Christmas preparations. Tree up on the 8th, lights on the 12th, cookies on the 18th. Christmas Eve arrived, unremarkable, and exactly as expected. I made soup for dinner because it was easy. Planned to watch a movie later. Maybe White Christmas. Maybe Miracle on 34th Street. Hadn't decided yet. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon. The tree lights twinkled. Nat King Cole sang about chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Everything was exactly as it should be for a woman spending Christmas alone. I was stirring the soup, thinking about nothing in particular, when the doorbell rang at 6:04 p.m., and my entire life changed in the time it took to walk from the kitchen to the front door. You probably think you know where this story goes from here. You probably think David and I had a tearful reunion, apologized to each other, and everything was magically fixed. It wasn't that simple. That first night, we didn't talk about the 10 years. We carefully avoided the elephant in the room and just existed together. I fed him soup and bread, made him tea, showed him to his old room, which I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. Something I realized was probably unhealthy, but couldn't bring myself to change. He stood in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, looking at the posters still on the walls, the books still on the shelves, the baseball trophies still on the dresser. "It's like a time capsule," he said quietly. "I couldn't change it," I admitted. "I tried a few times, but I couldn't." He nodded, understanding without me having to explain further. "Do you want to talk?" I asked. "About everything?" "Tomorrow," he said. "If that's okay, I drove 8 hours and I'm exhausted, and I think if we get into it now, I'll say things wrong." "Tomorrow's fine," I said, relieved and disappointed at the same time. He hugged me goodnight, a real hug, long and tight, and closed his bedroom door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to him move around the room, hearing the creak of his bed as he sat on it, and marveling at the fact that my son was home. Then I went to my own room, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours before finally falling asleep. I woke up on Christmas morning terrified that it had all been a dream, that I'd imagined the doorbell, the reunion, all of it. But when I walked into the kitchen, David was there, making coffee, looking rumpled and tired and real. "Morning, Mom," he said, and the smile he gave me was tentative but genuine. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, and my voice only shook a little. We had breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast, the same breakfast I'd made him 1,000 times when he was growing up. We talked about safe things, the drive from Boston, the snow, the weather forecast, whether the Browns would make the playoffs. After breakfast, we moved to the living room. I sat in my usual chair. David sat on the couch, the same spot he'd always sat as a kid. "So," he said after a long silence, "I guess I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," I said, "but I'd like to hear it if you're willing to share." He took a breath, gathered himself, and started talking. "If you've been waiting for the moment to show your support for this story and for this channel, this is it. Please hit that like button if this story is touching your heart. Leave a comment telling me what you think or what you might have done in Helen's shoes. Let me know what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing where our community reaches. Every like, every comment, every bit of engagement helps this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear stories of hope and second chances. Thank you for being here. David told me everything that Christmas morning. And I mean everything. He told me about the divorce, about how it had destroyed him in ways I couldn't have imagined, about how he'd felt like a complete failure, as a husband, as a man, as a human being, about how Sarah leaving him had confirmed every fear he'd ever had about not being enough, not being worthy of love. He told me about the night he called me drunk and hurting, how he'd needed me to just listen, to just hold space for his pain without trying to fix it or assign blame. "When you said those things about Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, When you called her not a real wife, it felt like you were saying I was too weak to keep my marriage together. Like I'd failed because I married the wrong woman, instead of failing because of my own shortcomings. That's not what I meant. I know that now, he said quickly. I know you were trying to make me feel better, but at the time I was already drowning in self-blame. And your words, They just confirmed everything I thought about myself. I listened without interrupting, letting him speak, giving him the space I should have given him 10 years ago. He told me about therapy, about how he'd started seeing a therapist in May 2016, right after our fight, and had been going weekly for 10 years, about how it had taken him 5 years just to work through the divorce, and another 5 to work through his relationship with me. I was so angry at you, he said. So angry. But I was also angry at myself for being angry, because you're my mom, and you were just trying to help. It was this circular thing I couldn't break out of. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why cut me off completely, instead of just telling me I'd hurt you? He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Because I didn't know how to be hurt and angry without being cruel. And I didn't want to be cruel to you. So I just removed myself from the equation entirely. It was the saddest thing I'd ever heard. He told me about the last 10 years of his life, about getting promoted to senior architect at his firm in 2019, about buying a condo in Cambridge in 2021, about dating occasionally, but never seriously, never letting anyone get close enough to hurt him again. He told me about all the times he'd almost called, birthdays, Christmases, random Tuesdays when something happened that made him think of me, about how he'd had my number pulled up on his phone dozens of times, but could never quite press the call button. What changed? I asked. What made you finally come home? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, therapy homework. I blinked. What? My therapist has been pushing me for about a year to reach out to you. Kept saying I was stuck, that I couldn't move forward in my life until I dealt with this. I kept making excuses. And then 2 weeks ago, she gave me an assignment. What kind of assignment? She told me to write you a letter. Didn't have to send it, just had to write it. Write down everything I wanted to say to you. All the hurt and anger and love and confusion. Just get it all out on paper. Did you write it? I wrote 17 drafts, he said with a sad laugh. Started on December 10th. Wrote and rewrote and rewrote. And somewhere around draft number 12, I realized something. What? That I didn't want to send a letter. I wanted to say it to your face. I wanted to come home. My vision blurred with tears. So you just decided to come. Just like that. Not just like that. I spent 3 days arguing with myself about it. Made a list of pros and cons. Called my therapist for an emergency session. Almost chickened out a dozen times. What made you go through with it? He looked at me, and his eyes were red and wet. I was sitting in my condo on December 23rd, and I realized I was about to spend my 11th Christmas without my mom. And I thought, what am I doing? What is all this pride and anger worth if it means I die without ever seeing her again? What if something happened to her, and I never got the chance to say, I'm sorry. Oh, David. I packed a bag that night, didn't sleep, just kept packing and unpacking and packing again. Left at 4 a.m. on Christmas Eve, drove 8 hours straight, sat in my car outside your house for 30 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to ring the doorbell. You were outside for 30 minutes? At least, maybe 40. Kept thinking you might not want to see me. Might slam the door in my face. might have moved on and built a life that didn't include a son who abandoned her. I started crying in earnest then. David, I never moved on. I could never move on from you. You're my son. You're my whole heart. I know that now, he said. I think I always knew it, but knowing something and feeling it are different things. We sat in silence for a while, both crying, both trying to process 2 years of pain in the space of one Christmas morning conversation. Finally, I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask. Can you forgive me for what I said, for hurting you when you needed me most? I already have, he said simply. I forgave you about 3 years ago, in therapy, but forgiving you and being ready to talk to you were 2 different things. I needed to forgive myself first. For what? For cutting you off. For letting pride and pain turn into a decade of silence. For missing Dad's funeral. You came to Dad's funeral, I said, confused. No, I mean his anniversary. Every year. I never called on the anniversary of his death. Never acknowledged it with you. We should have been grieving together. And instead I was grieving alone out of pure stubbornness. I was grieving alone too, I said quietly. I know. And I'm so sorry. I stood up, crossed the room, and pulled him into a hug. He was taller than me now, had been since he was 16. But in that moment he felt like my little boy again, small and scared and needing his mother. I'm sorry too, I whispered into his shoulder. I'm sorry for every hurtful thing I said. I'm sorry for not being the mother you needed in that moment. I'm sorry for all of it. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, crying, healing. When we finally pulled apart, I asked, "What happens now?" I don't know, he admitted. I mean, I know I want you in my life again. I know I don't want to lose another 10 years. But I don't know what this looks like going forward. We figure it out together, I said. One day at a time, that's all we can do. He nodded, relieved. One day at a time. I can do that. Also, I said, trying for lightness, you're staying for Christmas dinner, right? Because I bought a turkey breast, and there's no way I can eat it all myself. He laughed, a real laugh that lit up his whole face. Yeah, Mom, I'm staying for Christmas dinner. And for how long after that? I took the whole week off work. Figured if you were willing to talk to me, I'd want to stay a while, if that's okay with you. If that's okay with me? I repeated. David, you can stay as long as you want. Forever if you want. Maybe not forever, he said with a smile. But definitely this week. This week is good, I said. This week is perfect. That Christmas of 2026 was everything I'd spent 10 years dreaming about and had given up hope of ever having. We cooked dinner together, David and me, working side by side in the kitchen like we used to when he was young and would help me with holiday meals. I taught him again how to make my mother's stuffing recipe, the one I'd taught him when he was 12, but he'd forgotten. He taught me how to make roasted Brussels sprouts, some recipe he'd learned from a cooking class in Boston. We set the table with the good china, the set Thomas and I had gotten as a wedding present 46 years ago, and only used on special occasions. We said grace before eating, something I hadn't done in years because saying grace alone felt too sad. We talked about everything and nothing, about his work, my retirement, the neighbors, the state of Cleveland, politics, the weather, the food, safe topics at first, gradually working our way toward deeper things. Over dessert, Store-bought pumpkin pie because I'd been planning to eat alone and hadn't bothered with homemade, David asked about Dad. "Do you still miss him?" "Every day," I said honestly. "It's been 16 years and I still reach for him sometimes in the middle of the night. Still expect to hear his voice when I walk in the door. I miss him too, especially these last 10 years. He would have known what to say to fix things between us." "Your father wasn't great with words," I said with a sad smile. "But he was great at showing up, at being present, at loving people through actions instead of words. Like showing up on someone's doorstep after 10 years. Exactly like that. He would have been so proud of you for coming here, for being brave enough to try to fix things." David nodded, processing. Then, "I'm sorry I wasn't here more after he died. I know you needed me and I was dealing with my own grief and I wasn't there for you the way I should have been." "You were there," I said firmly. "You called every week. You visited when you could. You were building your own life, which is exactly what you should have been doing. I never expected you to drop everything and take care of your grieving mother. But these last 10 years were hard," I admitted. "The hardest of my life. But they're over now. We can't get them back, but we can make sure we don't waste any more time." He reached across the table and took my hand. "No more wasted time. I promise." We spent the evening watching It's a Wonderful Life, both of us crying at the ending like we always had. David fell asleep on the couch halfway through, exhausted from the emotional day and the long drive. I covered him with Thomas's old Afghan and sat in my chair watching him sleep, still hardly believing he was really there. When he woke up around 11 p.m., groggy and disoriented, he looked at me with panic in his eyes for a second. "It's okay," I said quickly. "You're home. You're here." He relaxed, remembering. I thought I'd dreamed it. "So did I confessed. "I'm still half convinced I'm going to wake up and you'll be gone." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not for a week, at least." "And after that week?" "After that week, I go back to Boston. But I'll call you, every Sunday like I used to, and I'll come back to visit, as often as I can. Promise?" "Promise." He went to bed around midnight. I stayed up for another hour, sitting in the quiet of my living room, looking at the tree, marveling at the fact that this Christmas, which I thought would be just like all the others, had turned into something miraculous. The next day, we started the real work of rebuilding our relationship. The week David spent with me was a gift I didn't know I could still receive. We fell into an easy routine almost immediately, like muscle memory from all the years when he'd lived at home. He'd wake up first, make coffee, bring me a cup in bed. We'd have breakfast together, then spend the day doing small things, running errands, watching movies, going for walks around the neighborhood despite the cold. He fixed things around the house that I'd been meaning to deal with for years. The leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, the loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, the draft under the front door. He did it all without me asking, just noticed things that needed fixing and fixed them. "You don't have to do all this," I told him on day 3, as he was replacing a light bulb in the hallway ceiling fixture that had been out for months. "I know," he said, "but I want to. I've got 10 years of helping out to make up for." "You don't owe me anything, David. Maybe not owe. But I want to contribute. I want to be useful." I understood that. It was his way of showing love, the way Thomas used to show love, through actions, through service, through making my life a little bit easier. We talked about his life in Boston. He showed me pictures of his condo, A beautiful 2-bedroom in Cambridge with exposed brick and huge windows. Showed me pictures of his office, his colleagues, the buildings he'd designed. "You've done so well for yourself," I said, pride and sadness mixing in my chest. "Your dad would be so proud." "I hope so," he said. "I think about him a lot when I'm designing. Wonder what he'd think of this building or that one, whether he'd appreciate the craftsmanship." "He'd love all of it," I assured him. "He'd love that you found something you're passionate about and made it your life's work." We talked about my life, too, though there was less to tell. I told him about Martha, about the library book club I'd briefly been part of, about the neighbors and their various dramas. "It sounds lonely," he said carefully on day 4, as we were making dinner together. "It is lonely," I admitted, "but it's my life. I've made peace with it." "You shouldn't have to make peace with loneliness, Mom. You should have people around you, family, friends." "I have friends. Martha's a good friend, and the neighbors are kind. But you're alone most of the time." I didn't know what to say to that because it was true, and we both knew it. "What about dating?" he asked suddenly. I nearly dropped the pot I was holding. "Dating? David, I'm 74 years old." "So? 74 isn't dead. Dad's been gone 16 years. Have you even thought about it?" "No," I said firmly. "Your father was my person. I don't want anyone else." "Okay," he said, backing off. "I just want you to be happy." "I am happy," I said, "especially this week. Having you here, getting to spend time with you. This is the happiest I've been in 10 years. He hugged me then, unexpected and tight. "Me too, Mom. Me too." On day 5, we drove to the cemetery to visit Thomas's grave. It was the first time I'd been there with another person in years. I usually went alone early in the morning when I knew I wouldn't see anyone else. But David asked if we could go together, and I couldn't say no. The cemetery was beautiful in the winter, peaceful and quiet. Snow covered everything in a clean white blanket. We walked to Thomas's headstone, a simple gray granite marker with his name, dates, and the words, "Beloved husband and father." David stood in front of it for a long time, not saying anything. I stood beside him, my hand in his, both of us quiet. Finally, David spoke. "Hey, Dad. Sorry it's been so long since I visited. I've been dealing with some stuff, but I'm working on it. And I brought Mom. We're okay now, or we're getting there. I think you'd be happy about that." I started crying quietly. David put his arm around me. "I miss you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I miss you so much. I wish you were here to tell me I'm doing the right thing, fixing things with Mom. I wish I could ask your advice about everything I've messed up." "He'd tell you he's proud of you," I said softly. "He'd tell you that coming home took more courage than staying away, and that he loves you no matter what." "You think so? I know so." We stayed at the cemetery for almost an hour, talking to Thomas, talking to each other, finding peace in the cold and quiet of that place. On day 6, we talked about the future. "I want you to come visit me in Boston," David said over breakfast. "Soon. Maybe in February or March." "Really? Really? I want to show you my life there. My condo, my office, my favorite restaurant. I want you to see what I've built." "I'd like that," I said, feeling a flutter of excitement I hadn't felt in years. "I'd really like that. And I'll come back here too, as often as I can. Maybe every other month, once a month. I haven't figured out the logistics yet, but I want to see you regularly." "We could also video call," I suggested. Like we used to do. Exactly. Sundays at 7 p.m., just like before. Just like before, I agreed. And Mom, I know this might be too much too fast, but I've been thinking about it all week. What would you think about moving to Boston? Being closer to me? I was stunned. Move to Boston? You could sell this house, get a nice apartment near me. We could see each other all the time. You wouldn't have to be alone anymore. David, this is my home. I've lived here for almost 50 years. I know, and if you want to stay, that's okay. I just wanted you to know the option is there. I want you in my life, Mom, as much as possible. I thought about it seriously for a moment. Imagined leaving Cleveland, leaving the house I'd shared with Thomas, leaving my neighbors and my routines and everything familiar. I couldn't do it. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. More than you know, but I think I need to stay here. This is where my memories are. This is where I feel close to your dad. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, he said, and he looked relieved that I wasn't angry about the suggestion. But promise me you'll think about it. You don't have to decide now. Just keep it in mind as an option. I promise I'll think about it. On day 7, David's last day, we spent the entire day together doing absolutely nothing productive. Watched movies, looked at old photo albums, made homemade pizza for dinner. I showed him the box I'd kept in my closet for 10 years. Every card I'd sent him, returned to sender or simply unanswered. Every letter I'd written and never mailed. Every newspaper clipping about his firm or projects he'd worked on that I'd found online and printed out. He cried when he saw it all. You kept all of this? Of course I did. You're my son. I kept everything. He held one of the cards I'd sent, birthday 2019, I think, and read it slowly. I'm sorry I never responded to these. I'm sorry I let my pride keep me from reaching out. We both let pride get in the way, I said. But it's over now. We don't have to do that anymore. That night, his last night, we stayed up late talking about everything we'd missed in 10 years, about hopes for the future, about what we'd learned from all this pain. I don't want to make the same mistakes again, David said around midnight, both of us exhausted but not wanting the day to end. I don't want to let fear or pride or hurt feelings keep us apart ever again. So we make a pact, I suggested. No matter what happens, no matter what arguments we might have in the future, we don't disappear on each other. We don't do the silent treatment. We talk it out, even when it's hard. Deal, he said immediately. No more silence. Even if we're angry, we stay in communication. Even if we're angry, I agreed. We shook on it, then hugged, and I felt something settle in my chest. A peace I hadn't felt in a decade. The certainty that my son and I were going to be okay. David left on New Year's Eve, early in the morning. He had to be back in Boston for work on January the 2nd, and he wanted to drive while the weather was still decent. I made him breakfast, packed him snacks for the road, fussed over him like he was 16 instead of 46. Mom, I'm good, he said, laughing as I tried to give him a 4th sandwich. It's only an 8-hour drive. I know. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. I know you do, and I love you for it. We stood on the porch, his suitcase already in the car, both of us reluctant to say goodbye even though we both knew it wasn't really goodbye anymore. You'll call when you get home? I asked. I'll call when I get home, he promised. And then Sunday at 7 p.m. We'll talk again. Sunday at 7 p.m., I repeated. And I'll be back in February. already requested the time off. February, I said, committing it to memory. He hugged me tight, and I breathed in the smell of him. Coffee and the cologne he'd been wearing since college, and something essentially David that I'd never been able to name. I love you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. I could never give up on you, I said into his shoulder. You're my son, my whole heart. Your whole heart, he repeated. I like that. He pulled away, got in his car, and I stood on the porch waving as he backed out of the driveway. He honked twice, the way he used to when he was young and leaving for college, and I watched until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside, sat in my living room and cried. But they were different tears this time. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Tears of relief that the long nightmare was finally over. My son had come home. We'd forgiven each other, and we were going to be okay. It's been a year since that Christmas. A year since David rang my doorbell and changed everything. He kept his promise about calling every Sunday. We talk for at least an hour, sometimes more. He tells me about his work, his life, the woman he's been seeing for 6 months now, named Jennifer. Yes, the same Jennifer who called me about the teaching advice back in 2020, which is how they reconnected and eventually started dating. I tell him about my week, my routines, the neighbor's drama, the books I'm reading. Small things that don't sound important but are important because we're sharing them with each other. He's come back to visit 3 times, February, June, and October. Each visit has been easier than the last, more natural, less weighed down by the past. I still haven't moved to Boston. Probably never will. This house is my home, and I'm comfortable here. But I did visit him in March, stayed for a week, met Jennifer, who is lovely and makes my son happy, which is all I care about. Saw his life there. It was good. Different from my life, but good. We've had disagreements this year. Of course we have, we're human. About politics. About whether I should get a smartphone. He thinks yes, I think no. About whether I'm eating enough vegetables. But we've kept our pact. No more silence. We talk through disagreements instead of letting them fester. It's not always comfortable, but it's healthy. And that's what matters. The holidays this year were different. David and Jennifer both came to Cleveland for Christmas. We did it up right. Big dinner, lots of decorations, the whole thing. And when I looked around my table on Christmas Day and saw my son and his girlfriend laughing and eating my cooking, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade. I felt like I had a family again. I'm not going to lie and say everything is perfect now. I still have moments of sadness when I think about the 10 years we lost. Still wish I could go back and keep my mouth shut during that phone call in April 2016. Still grieve for the time we can never get back. But I'm learning to be okay with imperfection, learning that relationships are messy and complicated, and sometimes you hurt the people you love most, and sometimes they hurt you. And the only thing you can do is forgive and move forward. I'm 75 years old now. I don't know how many years I have left. Don't know how many more Christmases I'll get to spend with my son. But I know this. Whatever time I have left, David will be part of it. He'll be in my life and I'll be in his. And we won't waste another day on pride or anger or fear. Because life is too short, and love is too important. And sometimes miracles happen on Christmas Eve, when you've given up hope entirely. Sometimes the doorbell rings, and when you open that door, you find everything you thought you'd lost forever standing on your porch, asking if you'll take them back. And you say yes. You always say yes. Because they're your child, your whole heart, and there's nothing in this world that could ever change that. Not even 10 years of silence. If you're still with me, if you've listened to this whole story, I want to say thank you. Thank you for caring about an old woman's journey through loss and back to love. And if you're dealing with estrangement from someone you love, whether you're the parent or the child, the one who left or the one who was left, I want you to know something. It's never too late. It's never too late to say you're sorry. Never too late to forgive. Never too late to pick up the phone or drive to someone's house or ring their doorbell and say, "I'm here. I'm ready. Can we try again?" Pride is a terrible thing to waste your life on. Fear is an even worse thing to let control you. I almost lost my son forever because I couldn't swallow my pride and apologize properly. He almost lost me because he was afraid I wouldn't want him anymore. We were both wrong. We were both foolish. And we're both incredibly lucky that we got a second chance. Not everyone gets that second chance. Some people wait too long, and the person they're estranged from dies before they can reconcile. Some people let the silence become so permanent that there's no bridge left to rebuild. Don't be those people. If there's someone in your life you've been estranged from, someone you miss but are too proud or too scared to reach out to, please think about taking that first step. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a big, dramatic gesture. It can be as simple as a text message saying, "I miss you," or a card saying, "I'm sorry," or showing up on their doorstep and saying, "Can we talk?" The worst thing that can happen is they say no. But the best thing that can happen is they say yes, and you get your person back. Isn't that worth the risk? I'm 75 years old, and I've learned a lot of hard lessons in my life. But the hardest, most important lesson I've learned is this. Love is all that matters in the end. Not pride, not being right, not protecting yourself from potential hurt. Just love. Choose love. Choose forgiveness. Choose connection over self-protection. Choose to pick up the phone. Choose to send the card. Choose to ring the doorbell. Choose to say, "I'm home," if you still want me. Because I promise you, if they love you, and they do, even if years and hurt and pride have buried that love under layers of pain, they'll always want you. They've been waiting for you to come home. Just like I waited for David. Just like he was waiting for permission to try. Just like we're all waiting for the people we love to take that brave first step. Be brave. Take the step. Ring the doorbell. You never know what miracles might be waiting on the other side. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe in second chances and the power of forgiveness. Before I go, I have one last request. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. If you want to hear more real stories of hope and healing, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. And please leave a comment telling me what you thought, what it made you feel, or where you're watching from. Every comment, every like, every subscription helps this channel reach more people who need to hear that it's never too late for love. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and may you all find the courage to ring whatever doorbells you've been afraid to ring. With love, Helen.